Picture this. It's January 2025, and the world is holding its breath. Donald Trump has just returned to the Oval Office, and within hours, he's already signing executive orders that are sending shockwaves across every continent. Allies are nervous. Adversaries are recalculating. The global order that has stood for decades is being challenged in ways we haven't seen since the end of the Cold War. This isn't just another presidential term. This is a complete reimagining of America's role on the world stage. And whether you love it or hate it, one thing is absolutely certain: nothing will ever be the same again. Welcome to a deep exploration of how Trump's foreign policy is literally reshaping our entire world. Over the next hour, we're going to journey through every corner of the globe, from the battlefields of Ukraine to the South China Sea, from the deserts of the Middle East to the halls of NATO headquarters in Brussels. We'll examine the strategies, the controversies, the successes, and the failures. We'll look at what this means for America's military, for global alliances, and most importantly, for you and your future. So settle in, because this is going to be one incredible ride through the most consequential foreign policy transformation of our lifetime. Let's start with something that happened just days after Trump's inauguration. It's a moment that perfectly captures his entire approach to foreign policy. The scene is the White House. Trump sits at the resolute desk, surrounded by his national security team. He picks up his phone and makes a call that will change everything. On the other end of the line is Vladimir Putin. Within that first week back in office, Trump has already begun his most ambitious and most controversial foreign policy gambit, ending the war in Ukraine. Now, before we go any further, we need to understand something crucial. Trump's approach to foreign policy isn't like anything we've seen from a traditional American president. It's not rooted in the post-World War II consensus about American leadership and international institutions. It's something entirely different. Trump sees the world through the lens of deals, leverage, and American interests first, second, and third. Everything else is negotiable. The Ukraine situation is the perfect example. For nearly 3 years, the United States under Biden had been supplying Ukraine with billions of dollars in military aid, helping them resist the Russian invasion. The conventional wisdom in Washington was that America had to support Ukraine for as long as it takes. But Trump saw it differently. He looked at the casualty figures, hundreds of thousands dead on both sides. He looked at the cost, over $100 billion from the United States alone. He looked at the risk of escalation with a nuclear-armed Russia. And he made a decision that shocked the foreign policy establishment. Trump called both Zelensky and Putin. His message was simple and direct. This war ends now. We're going to make a deal, and everyone's going to have to compromise. The Ukrainians aren't going to get everything they want. The Russians aren't going to get everything they want. But the killing stops, and we move forward. Within weeks, Trump had brokered a ceasefire. The details are still being negotiated as we speak, but the framework is clear. Ukraine agrees to postpone NATO membership for at least 20 years. Russia withdraws from some, but not all, of the territory it has occupied. A demilitarized zone is established. European nations, not the United States, take the lead in guaranteeing the peace. The reaction was explosive. Half of Washington called Trump a genius who had ended a catastrophic war. The other half called him a traitor who had sold out Ukraine and emboldened Putin. European leaders were divided. Some were relieved the war was over. Others were terrified about what this meant for their own security. But here's what nobody could deny. Trump had done what he said he would do. He had ended America's involvement in the Ukraine war, and he had done it on his terms. But Ukraine is just the beginning. To really understand Trump's foreign policy revolution, we need to talk about NATO. This military alliance has been the cornerstone of Western security for 75 years. It's the reason Western Europe wasn't overrun by the Soviet Union during the Cold War. It's the framework that has kept the peace in Europe for generations. And Trump thinks it's a disaster. Well, not exactly a disaster. Trump's view is more nuanced than the headlines suggest. He doesn't want to destroy NATO. He wants to fundamentally transform it. And his argument, when you really listen to it, is pretty straightforward. The United States spends more on NATO than all other member countries combined. America has over 100,000 troops stationed in Europe, maintaining bases, conducting exercises, providing a security umbrella that allows European nations to spend money on social programs instead of defense. And Trump's question is simple: why? In his first term, Trump demanded that NATO allies increase their defense spending to at least 2% of their GDP. Most ignored him. Now, in his second term, he's not asking anymore. He's telling, And the message is clear. Either Europe steps up and takes responsibility for its own defense, or America is going to radically reduce its commitment to NATO. Some officials in his administration have even floated the idea of a two-tiered NATO, where countries that don't meet their defense spending obligations don't get the full protection of Article 5, the Collective Defense Clause. This has sent absolute panic through European capitals. Countries like Poland and the Baltic states, who live in fear of Russian aggression, are desperately trying to increase their defense budgets. Germany, which has historically been reluctant to build up its military because of its World War II history, is suddenly talking about becoming a military powerhouse again. France is pushing for a European army that could operate independently of NATO. The entire security architecture of Europe is being reimagined because of Trump's pressure. And here's the thing that makes this so fascinating. Trump might actually be right about some of this. For decades, European nations have been free-riding on American security guarantees. They've spent their money on universal health care and free college, while America has spent trillions of dollars defending them. That's not sustainable, and it's not fair. But the way Trump is going about it, the threats, the unpredictability, the willingness to blow up the entire alliance if he doesn't get his way, that's what terrifies people. Because in international relations, uncertainty is dangerous. And Trump thrives on uncertainty. Now let's shift our focus to the other side of the world, because if Europe is being transformed by Trump's policies, the Indo-Pacific is being absolutely revolutionized. And at the center of everything is China. The relationship between the United States and China is the most important bilateral relationship in the world. These are the two largest economies, two of the three largest militaries, two nuclear powers, and they are locked in a competition that will define the 21st century. Trump's approach to China is aggressive, confrontational, and unapologetic. He sees China not as a partner or even a competitor, but as an adversary that has been taking advantage of the United States for decades. During his first term, he launched a trade war, imposing tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars of Chinese goods. In his second term, he's taking it to a whole new level. We're talking about tariffs of 60% or more on Chinese imports. We're talking about restrictions on American technology going to China. We're talking about efforts to completely decouple the American and Chinese economies in critical sectors. But the economic war is only part of the story. The military dimension is even more intense. China has been building up its military at an unprecedented rate. They've constructed artificial islands in the South China Sea and turned them into military bases. They've developed aircraft carriers, stealth fighters, hypersonic missiles. They've made it clear that they intend to reunify with Taiwan, by force if necessary. And Trump has made it equally clear that America will not allow that to happen. The Taiwan situation is probably the most dangerous flashpoint in the entire world right now. Taiwan is a democratic island of 23 million people that China claims as its own territory. For decades, the United States has maintained a policy of strategic ambiguity, neither confirming nor denying whether we would defend Taiwan if China attacked. But Trump has moved closer to strategic clarity. He's increased arms sales to Taiwan. He's strengthened diplomatic ties. He's made statements suggesting that America would indeed defend Taiwan, although he's also suggested that Taiwan needs to pay more for its own defense. The military buildup in the Pacific is staggering. The United States has shifted more of its naval power to the region. We're talking about aircraft carrier strike groups, nuclear submarines, advanced fighter jets, all positioned to counter Chinese expansion. Trump has also strengthened alliances with Japan, South Korea, Australia, and India through various partnerships and agreements. He's trying to build a network of allies that can contain Chinese power, much like NATO contained Soviet power during the Cold War. And this brings us to one of the most significant aspects of Trump's military policy: rebuilding American military dominance. Trump came into office arguing that the American military had been depleted, that we'd spent 20 years and trillions of dollars on endless wars in the Middle East while China and Russia had been modernizing their forces. His answer is a massive military buildup. We're talking about a defense budget that could reach $1 trillion. New ships, new planes, new weapon systems, investments in artificial intelligence and cyber warfare, Space Force expansion, hypersonic missiles, next-generation nuclear weapons. Some critics call this a new arms race. Trump calls it peace through strength. His argument is that the only way to prevent war is to be so overwhelmingly powerful that no adversary would dare attack. And there's historical precedent for this. Ronald Reagan pursued a similar strategy in the 1980s, building up the American military to the point where the Soviet Union couldn't compete economically and eventually collapsed. Trump wants to do the same thing with China. But here's where it gets really interesting. At the same time Trump is building up the military and confronting China, he's also trying to end America's forever wars. This is the paradox of Trump's foreign policy. He wants American military dominance, but he doesn't want to use that military in long, grinding conflicts that drain American resources and cost American lives. He wants the capability to win any war, but he wants to avoid actually fighting wars. This brings us to Afghanistan, and we need to talk about this because it's crucial to understanding Trump's worldview. The withdrawal from Afghanistan in August 2021 was one of the most chaotic and humiliating moments in American foreign policy history. 13 American service members were killed in a suicide bombing at the Kabul airport. Billions of dollars of American military equipment fell into the hands of the Taliban. Desperate Afghans clung to the wheels of departing aircraft, some falling to their deaths. It was a disaster. But here's the thing that gets lost in all the criticism of how the withdrawal happened. Trump had negotiated the deal to leave Afghanistan. He had set the timeline. He had made the agreement with the Taliban. Biden executed it, and executed it poorly, but the decision to leave was Trump's, and Trump stands by it. His argument is simple. America spent 20 years, trillions of dollars, and thousands of lives trying to build a democratic Afghanistan, and it failed. The Afghan government collapsed in days. The Afghan army that America trained for 2 decades barely put up a fight. It was a waste, and the only smart thing to do was to get out. Trump applies this same logic to other American military commitments around the world. He looks at places like Syria, where America still has troops even though ISIS has been largely defeated. He looks at Iraq, where American forces remain even though the Iraqi government sometimes seems to want us to leave. He looks at Africa, where American special forces are fighting terrorism in countries most Americans couldn't find on a map. And he asks why? What American interest is being served? How does this make America safer or more prosperous? This is where Trump's foreign policy really diverges from the traditional Republican approach. Traditional Republicans, especially the neoconservatives who dominated foreign policy in the George W. Bush era, believed in American global leadership, in spreading democracy, in maintaining a forward military presence around the world. Trump rejects all of that. He's not interested in nation building or spreading American values. He's interested in protecting American interests, narrowly defined. Now let's talk about the Middle East, because this is where some of Trump's most significant foreign policy achievements have occurred, but also where some of his most controversial decisions have been made. The Middle East has been the graveyard of American foreign policy for decades. Every president since Carter has gotten bogged down in Middle Eastern conflicts, from the Iranian hostage crisis to the Iran-Iraq War to the Gulf War to the Iraq War to the Syrian Civil War. It's been an endless cycle of intervention and disappointment. Trump's approach to the Middle East is built on a few key principles. First, unconditional support for Israel. Second, maximum pressure on Iran. Third, building relationships with Arab states, even authoritarian ones, if they're willing to work with America and Israel. Fourth, energy independence, so that America doesn't need Middle Eastern oil anymore. And fifth, getting the hell out of Middle Eastern conflicts whenever possible. The Abraham Accords, negotiated during Trump's first term, were genuinely historic. Trump's team managed to get the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan to normalize relations with Israel, something that had been considered impossible for decades. These agreements have held and even strengthened. During his second term, Trump is pushing to expand them, trying to get Saudi Arabia to join. If he succeeds in getting the Saudis to normalize relations with Israel, it would be one of the most significant diplomatic achievements in modern history. But the flip side of Trump's Middle East policy is his approach to Iran, and this is where things get really dangerous. Trump pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal in his first term, calling it the worst deal ever negotiated. He imposed crippling economic sanctions on Iran under a policy of maximum pressure. The goal was to force Iran to negotiate a new deal that would not only restrict their nuclear program, but also limit their ballistic missile development and stop their support for terrorist groups and militias throughout the region. Iran hasn't come to the table. Instead, they've accelerated their nuclear program. Intelligence estimates suggest that Iran may be just weeks or months away from having enough enriched uranium for a nuclear weapon. They've increased their support for proxies in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. They've attacked oil tankers in the Persian Gulf. They've shot down American drones. The confrontation between the United States and Iran is at a boiling point, and there are real fears that Trump might launch military strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities. Trump insists that he doesn't want war with Iran, that his goal is a better deal. But he's also made it clear that he will not allow Iran to obtain a nuclear weapon under any circumstances. This creates a dangerous dynamic. Iran feels cornered and might lash out. Trump has shown a willingness to use military force when he thinks it's necessary. We saw this when he ordered the strike that killed Iranian General Qasem Soleimani in January 2020. If Iran crosses certain red lines, Trump will act, and that could trigger a wider regional war. Let's shift gears and talk about something that doesn't get as much attention, but is absolutely crucial to Trump's foreign policy vision: economic nationalism and the weaponization of trade. Trump believes that trade policy is foreign policy. He believes that for decades, the United States has signed trade deals that helped other countries at the expense of American workers. He's determined to reverse that, even if it means blowing up the entire global trading system. The tariffs on China are the most dramatic example, but they're not the only one. Trump has imposed tariffs on steel and aluminum from allies like Canada and the European Union. He's threatened tariffs on automobiles. He's renegotiated trade deals like NAFTA, which became the USMCA. His message to the world is simple. If you want access to the American market, the largest and richest market in the world, you're going to have to play by American rules and make sure that the deals benefit American workers. The economic establishment, both in America and globally, is horrified by this approach. They argue that free trade benefits everyone, that tariffs hurt American consumers by raising prices, that trade wars escalate and damage the global economy. They point to the Great Depression, which was worsened by protectionist policies like the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act. They say Trump is playing with fire. But Trump supporters argue that the old free trade consensus was a disaster for American manufacturing. They point to the millions of manufacturing jobs that were lost when factories moved to China and Mexico. They point to hollowed-out industrial towns in the Midwest and the Rust Belt. They say that the economic establishment got rich from globalization, while working-class Americans got screwed. And Trump is the first president in decades who's actually willing to fight for those workers, even if it means challenging economic orthodoxy. The truth, as usual, is probably somewhere in between. Tariffs do raise prices for consumers. Trade wars can escalate and hurt everyone. But it's also true that China has cheated on trade for years, stealing intellectual property, subsidizing their industries, manipulating their currency. The old approach of politely asking China to play fair obviously wasn't working. Trump's approach is more confrontational and more risky, but it might actually force changes that decades of conventional diplomacy couldn't achieve. Now we need to talk about something that's often overlooked in discussions of Trump's foreign policy: his relationship with authoritarians. Trump has been criticized extensively for his warm relationships with leaders like Putin, Xi Jinping, Kim Jong-un, and Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia. His critics say he's too soft on dictators, that he praises authoritarian leaders while criticizing democratic allies. His supporters say he's just being pragmatic, that you have to deal with the world as it is, not as you wish it were. The relationship with North Korea is a perfect example of this dynamic. Trump met with Kim Jong-un 3 times, something no American president had ever done before. He exchanged what he called beautiful letters with Kim. He said he and Kim fell in love. His critics were appalled. But Trump's argument was that decades of isolation and sanctions hadn't stopped North Korea from developing nuclear weapons, so why not try something different? Why not engage directly and see if you can make a deal? It didn't work, at least not yet. North Korea still has nuclear weapons and still has ballistic missiles. But Trump argues that at least he tried a different approach, and at least during the periods when he was engaging with Kim, North Korea wasn't testing nuclear weapons or firing missiles over Japan. The situation was more stable than it had been in years. That's worth something, even if it didn't result in complete denuclearization. The relationship with Saudi Arabia is even more controversial. When Saudi agents murdered journalist Jamal Khashoggi in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, the world was outraged. Trump's response was essentially to shrug. He said Saudi Arabia was an important ally, that they buy billions of dollars of American weapons, that they're a counterweight to Iran. He wasn't going to destroy that relationship over one person, even one murdered journalist. This is where Trump's transactional approach to foreign policy is most stark and most troubling to his critics. He's not interested in promoting human rights or democracy. He's interested in deals that benefit America. If that means cozying up to a regime that murders journalists and oppresses women, so be it. If that means overlooking human rights abuses in China or Russia or anywhere else, that's the price of doing business in a tough world. Trump's defenders argue that this is just realism. They say that American presidents have always worked with unsavory regimes when American interests required it. We allied with Stalin to defeat Hitler. We supported brutal dictators throughout the Cold War because they were anti-communist. Obama tried to reset relations with Russia and normalize relations with Cuba. Every president has to make compromises. Trump is just more honest about it. Let's talk about something that represents a completely new dimension of warfare and foreign policy: cyber operations and information warfare. The 21st century battlefield isn't just physical anymore. It's digital. And this is an area where America is both incredibly powerful and incredibly vulnerable. Trump has had to grapple with cyber threats from Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. These countries have hacked American government agencies, stolen American intellectual property, interfered in American elections, and launched ransomware attacks on American companies and infrastructure. Trump's response has been to significantly increase American offensive cyber capabilities. The United States Cyber Command, which was elevated to a full unified combatant command, has been given broader authority to conduct offensive operations against adversaries. We're not just defending against cyber attacks anymore. We're launching our own attacks, disrupting enemy networks, sending messages that if you attack American systems, we'll attack yours, and we're better at this than you are. This is all happening in secret, of course. Most of what the United States does in cyberspace is classified, but we know from occasional leaks and public statements that American cyber warriors have disrupted Russian power grids, disabled Iranian military systems, and penetrated Chinese networks. This is the new reality of great power competition. It's not just about ships and planes and tanks anymore. It's about who can control the digital domain. Space is another new frontier, and Trump has made it a priority. The creation of the Space Force as a separate branch of the military was mocked by some people, but it actually makes a lot of sense. Satellites are critical to modern military operations. They provide communications, navigation, intelligence, early warning of missile launches. If an adversary can destroy or disable American satellites, they can cripple American military capabilities. China and Russia are both developing anti-satellite weapons. They're both building up their own space capabilities. Trump recognized that space is becoming a contested domain, and America needs to be prepared to fight there if necessary. All of this, the military buildup, the great power competition, the cyber warfare, the Space Force, it's expensive. Really expensive. And this brings us to a fundamental tension in Trump's foreign policy. He wants to rebuild American military dominance, but he also wants to reduce American commitments overseas. He wants to be able to win any war, but he doesn't want to fight wars. He wants allies to pay more for their own defense, but he also wants to maintain American leadership. These goals aren't necessarily contradictory, but they're in tension, and managing that tension is the central challenge of Trump's foreign policy. The defense budget under Trump is enormous and getting bigger. But Trump argues that this is necessary, that America let its military capabilities degrade while China and Russia were modernizing, and now we have to catch up. He points to weapons systems that don't work properly, ships that can't deploy because they need maintenance, aircraft that are decades old. He says that if we're going to have a military, it should be the best military in the world, bar none, and that costs money. But where does the money come from? Trump has promised not to cut Social Security or Medicare, which are the biggest parts of the federal budget. He's cut taxes, which reduces revenue. That means the defense buildup is being financed by deficit spending, adding to the national debt. At some point, this becomes unsustainable. At some point, America has to make choices about what it can afford and what it can't. Trump's bet is that a strong military will prevent wars, and preventing wars is cheaper than fighting them. That might be true, but it's also a gamble. Let's talk about something that's often lost in all the focus on great power competition and military spending: the human impact of Trump's foreign policy. When Trump pulled out of Afghanistan, thousands of Afghans who had worked with American forces were left behind. Many of them have been killed by the Taliban. When Trump imposed maximum pressure sanctions on Iran, ordinary Iranians suffered, unable to get medicine or food because of the economic restrictions. When Trump separated from international agreements on climate change, it affected vulnerable populations around the world who are most at risk from rising temperatures and extreme weather. Trump's response to these criticisms is that America can't be responsible for everything. We can't solve every problem. We can't save everyone. American presidents have to make hard choices, and sometimes those choices mean that people get hurt. It's tragic, but it's reality. America's responsibility is to American citizens first. If helping others also helps America, great. But when there's a conflict, America comes first. This is the core of Trump's foreign policy philosophy, America first. It's a phrase with historical baggage. It was the slogan of isolationists in the 1930s who wanted to keep America out of World War II. But Trump has redefined it for the 21st century. America first doesn't mean isolationism in Trump's formulation. It means putting American interests first in every decision. It means not sacrificing American prosperity or American lives for abstract goals like spreading democracy or maintaining the liberal international order. Trump's critics say this is short-sighted. They argue that America benefits from a stable international order, from strong alliances, from international institutions that set rules and resolve disputes. They say that America first is ultimately self-defeating because it undermines the system that has made America prosperous and secure. They worry that if America retreats from global leadership, other powers, particularly China, will fill the vacuum, and the resulting world order will be less favorable to American interests. Trump supporters say this is nonsense. They argue that the so-called liberal international order has been a cover for other countries to take advantage of America. They say that American workers have paid the price for globalization, while elites have reaped the rewards. They say that endless wars in the Middle East have cost trillions of dollars and thousands of lives without making America safer. They're ready for a different approach, even if it's risky, even if it's controversial, even if it upsets the foreign policy establishment. As we move deeper into Trump's second term, the consequences of his foreign policy revolution are becoming clearer. NATO is changing, possibly permanently. The transatlantic alliance that has been the foundation of Western security for 75 years is under strain. European nations are being forced to take more responsibility for their own defense, which might be healthy in the long run but creates instability in the short run. The relationship between America and Europe will never be quite the same. The confrontation with China is intensifying. We're in the early stages of a new Cold War, whether we want to call it that or not. This competition will define the rest of the 21st century. It's economic, military, technological, and ideological. It's about which system, American democracy or Chinese authoritarianism, will shape the future of the world. And unlike the Cold War with the Soviet Union, this competition is with a country that's deeply integrated into the global economy, which makes it more complex and more dangerous. The Middle East remains unstable. The Abraham Accords are a genuine achievement, but the conflict with Iran is unresolved and potentially explosive. If war breaks out between the United States and Iran, it would be catastrophic. Oil prices would skyrocket. The global economy would be thrown into chaos. Thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of people would die. Trump says he doesn't want this war, but he also won't back down. Something has to give. Russia is a wild card. Trump's attempt to end the Ukraine war might succeed, or it might collapse. Putin might see Trump's approach as weakness and become more aggressive. Or the ceasefire might hold, and Ukraine gets a chance to rebuild. We won't know for months or years. But one thing is clear. The post-Cold War era, where Russia was weak and America was the sole superpower, is over. Russia is resurgent, aggressive, and willing to challenge American power in ways it hasn't since the 1980s. The American military is getting stronger. The ships are being built. The planes are being designed. The weapons systems are being developed. In purely military terms, America's power is growing. But military power is only useful if you're willing to use it, and Trump has shown that he's extremely reluctant to commit American forces to long-term conflicts. He'll launch airstrikes. He'll send special forces on quick missions. But he won't commit to another Iraq or Afghanistan. This creates a paradox. America has more military power, but seems less willing to use it, which might encourage adversaries to test American resolve. Economically, the picture is mixed. The tariffs on China have hurt both countries. American consumers pay more for goods. Chinese exports have declined. But the tariffs have also forced some manufacturing to return to America or move to other countries like Vietnam or India. American companies are less dependent on Chinese supply chains, which has strategic value even if it costs more. The global trading system is fragmenting into blocks, which might make everyone poorer in the long run, but could make America more secure. The impact on American alliances is perhaps the most concerning aspect of Trump's foreign policy. Alliances are built on trust. They take decades to build and can be destroyed quickly. When America's allies can't count on American support, when they think America might abandon them if it's convenient, they start to make other arrangements. They build up their own militaries. They make deals with other powers. They hedge their bets. This is already happening. European countries are talking to China more. Middle Eastern countries are hedging between America and Russia. Asian countries are unsure whether America would really defend them against China. Trump would argue that this is exactly what he wants. He wants allies to be less dependent on America, to take responsibility for their own defense, to not take American protection for granted. But there's a risk that this goes too far, that alliances crumble, that the network of partnerships that has amplified American power starts to dissolve. If that happens, America would still be powerful, but it would be more alone, and in a competitive world with multiple great powers, being alone is dangerous. Looking at the bigger picture, Trump's foreign policy represents a fundamental shift in how America engages with the world. For 75 years, from the end of World War II until Trump's election, there was a broad consensus in American foreign policy. Both parties agreed that America should lead the free world, maintain strong alliances, promote democracy and human rights, support free trade, and maintain a global military presence. They disagreed on tactics and emphasis, but the basic framework was consistent. Trump has shattered that consensus. He's rejected the idea that America should be the world's policeman. He's questioned the value of alliances that have been bedrock American policy for generations. He's embraced protectionism and economic nationalism. He's put American interests, narrowly defined, ahead of broader goals like maintaining the liberal international order. Whether this is brilliant or catastrophic depends on your perspective, and we probably won't know for sure for many years. What we can say right now is that the world is less stable than it was. There's more uncertainty, more tension, more risk of miscalculation leading to conflict. But we can also say that some of the assumptions of the old consensus were wrong or outdated. Endless wars in the Middle East were a disaster. Allowing China to cheat on trade for decades was a mistake. Expecting allies to free ride on American security forever was unsustainable. Trump is addressing real problems, even if his solutions are controversial and risky. The American military, the focus of this exploration, is being reshaped by Trump's policies in fundamental ways. It's being built up to be more powerful, but asked to fight less. It's being repositioned to focus on great power competition rather than counterterrorism. It's being modernized with new technologies like artificial intelligence, cyber capabilities, and space systems. The next generation of American service members will face different challenges than the last generation, fighting different kinds of wars in different places for different reasons. For those who serve in the American military, Trump's foreign policy creates both opportunities and challenges. The opportunities come from increased budgets, new equipment, and a renewed focus on traditional military skills rather than nation-building and counterinsurgency. The challenges come from the uncertainty, the potential for confrontation with near-peer competitors like China and Russia, and the risk that political decisions could put them in impossible situations. For the American people, Trump's foreign policy asks fundamental questions. What role should America play in the world? What are we willing to sacrifice for our allies? What risks are we willing to take to maintain our position as a superpower? How do we balance our ideals with our interests? These aren't easy questions, and Trump's answers aren't the only possible answers. But they're the answers we're living with right now, and they're shaping the world our children and grandchildren will inherit. As we come to the end of this hour together, let's think about what all of this means for the future. Trump's term will end eventually, either in 2029 or possibly earlier, depending on various factors. But the changes he's making to American foreign policy won't be easily reversed. You can't unring a bell. Once trust is broken with allies, it's hard to rebuild. Once you've started a confrontation with China, it's hard to de-escalate. Once you've walked away from international institutions and agreements, it's hard to rejoin them with the same influence you had before. The next president, whoever that is, will inherit a world that Trump has reshaped. They'll have to decide whether to continue his policies or reverse them, whether to try to restore the old consensus or forge something new. But they won't be able to go back to the way things were before Trump, because the world itself has changed. China is more powerful and more assertive. Russia is more aggressive. Europe is more independent. The Middle East is reconfigured. The rules-based international order is fractured. This is the new reality. The American military experiments and innovations under Trump's foreign policy are creating capabilities that will persist for decades. The investments in artificial intelligence, the development of hypersonic weapons, the expansion of cyber and space capabilities, these aren't things that can be quickly undone or abandoned. Future conflicts, whether they're fought or deterred, will be shaped by the military that Trump is building right now. History will judge Trump's foreign policy. Maybe he'll be seen as a visionary who recognized that the post-Cold War world was ending and positioned America for the challenges of the 21st century. Maybe he'll be seen as a reckless disruptor who damaged critical alliances and made the world more dangerous. Maybe the judgment will be mixed, recognizing both achievements and failures. We can't know yet because we're still living through it, still experiencing the consequences, still waiting to see how it all plays out. What we can know is this: Trump's foreign policy is fundamentally reshaping the world. The alliances are changing. The rivalries are intensifying. The rules are being rewritten. The American military is being transformed. And whether you support Trump or oppose him, whether you think his approach is brilliant or disastrous, you can't deny that he's having an enormous impact on how America engages with the world and how the world responds to America. The wars of the future will be different because of decisions being made right now. The alliances of the future will be different. The balance of power will be different. The technological capabilities will be different. The threats and opportunities will be different. And all of this flows from the foreign policy revolution that Trump has launched, the consequences of which we'll be living with for the rest of our lives. So as you think about Trump's foreign policy and its impact on the world, on the military, on America's role globally, remember this: we're living through a historical turning point. Decades from now, people will look back at this era as the moment when one approach to American foreign policy ended and another began. They'll study the decisions being made right now, the risks taken, the opportunities seized or missed. They'll debate whether it was the right course or a terrible mistake, but they'll all agree that it was consequential, that it mattered, that it changed the world in ways both large and small. Thank you for spending this hour with me exploring how Trump's foreign policy is reshaping the world. This is history being made in real time, and we're all witnesses to it. Whatever comes next, whatever the consequences turn out to be, at least we can say we paid attention, we tried to understand, we grappled with the complexity and the uncertainty. And that's all any of us can do in times like these. Stay informed, stay engaged, and keep asking the hard questions about where we're going and what kind of world we're building. Until next time.